Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today as we discuss chatbots in the healthcare industry. I'm Artie Merritt, helping moderate a panel with a great lineup of speakers here that we thought we could just do some quick intros, and perhaps we can start with you, Josh.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm Josh Cutler. I currently am working as the Chief Data Scientist at UnitedHealthcare, where we have a lot of work that we're doing with chatbots kind of all over the spectrum. Prior to this, I founded and was CTO for a conversational AI company that studied dialogue in the phone space.
And how about Alexia?
Hi, everyone. I'm Alexia Sibony. I'm the Vice President of Product at Orbita. I'm also a physical therapist from background, and at Orbita, we are a conversational AI platform, an Omnichannel conversational platform to transform lives through the power of conversational AI. Happy to be here today.
And Stefan? Yes.
Even better when not muted. Hi, my name is Stefan Behrens. I'm CEO and co-founder at Gyant. At Gyant, we believe in making people better. That includes making patients better, but also making people who work in the health system better by taking off administrative burdens, by using conversational assistants and also digital virtual assistants that patients can interact with to do a lot of different tasks around the healthcare ecosystem.
Great. I appreciate all you being part of this. I think we have a great panel lineup here for this discussion today. And just to get started, why are healthcare enterprises implementing chatbots and voice assistants? What are some of the reasons why? And perhaps we can start with you, Josh.
Sure. So I think we're doing it for many of the reasons that any other businesses are, but I think Stefan called it out, right? It's to make members' experiences better, it's to make providers' experiences better, it's to make our own employees' experiences better. All of those things are really what we're looking at. Just to be more concrete, right? There are certain experiences that you have with your insurer or your medical provider where you just want the answer fast because it is a simple interaction. Please send me another insurance card. You don't want to wait on hold for 15 minutes to do that. And those types of experiences, we'd love to be able to do instantaneously today. Similarly, for providers, there's lots of just interactions where they just need access to information quickly, and chatbots are an awesome medium for that. We can do that. And that third, for our own employees, we're deploying chatbots today to make, for example, our advocates in our call centers more effective, right? So they can interact with those to more quickly access information to help members who have called in, where maybe that member didn't want to interact with a chatbot or wasn't appropriate for why they were calling, but it did make our advocate more effective and able to help them on the phone.
That's great. How about yourself, Alexia? What are you seeing with why enterprises are doing these?
Sure. So at Orbita, we are focusing on holistic enterprise solutions, right? And what our mission is automation with empathy, meaning that actually we're trying to meet the patients where they are, when they need, and in a way that is actually accessible, familiar, and convenient. The languages are actually the most efficient way to communicate, right? It's actually a language that they don't have to learn. The technology adoption can be hard sometimes for people, for patients. So conversational experiences feel natural. On the other convenience of conversational AI is the personalization of it. Thanks to technology that can be adaptive, we can actually adapt the entire user experience with those platforms. Mobile, web, desktop applications, they have never been able actually to be truly adaptive in the same way that conversational AI and UX can.
Definitely. How about yourself, Stefan?
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, I think in healthcare, the reasons are the same as in any other industry as well. So you either want to bring revenue up, and I can talk about some of these aspects, or you want to bring costs down. I think Josh already mentioned a couple of those self-service use cases. Rather than spending time holding on the phone or talking to a human for something that is a simple, 30-second lookup on a conversational AI interface. Those are obvious. They bring down the cost to serve. But I think there's another aspect on the revenue side. You want to improve member or patient satisfaction. That is a way to build loyalty and to differentiate in the marketplace. And if you can choose between getting an answer right now in the middle of the night and booking an appointment straight away, or having to call back in Monday morning at 9 a.m. and guess what? That's when everyone else calls in and you're spending half an hour waiting on the phone. If you can choose between those two experiences, you're going to go the one that allows you to get self-service fast. That doesn't work for all patients, but I think it works for a large number of the patient population, and thus is a competitive differentiator for a lot of our customers. So I think those are the two main reasons.
Yeah, so basically some of the reasons why include the operation efficiencies, maybe reducing costs. There's the better user experiences, being able to access these 24/7, especially for these low complexity, high volume type tasks. And I like what Alexia, how you added like being where the patients are, like the channels that they want to communicate to. That all sounds great. Have you noticed, especially since we're talking about healthcare, any increase in demand or change in the interest based on COVID-19? Any differences? And maybe start with
Sure.
Alexia. Yeah.
I can actually say a word on that. It's obvious that we can't overestimate, right, the impact of COVID that has had on the digital transformation. The adoption of technology grew significantly for the past year. The pandemic drove a long anticipated transformation in healthcare, which lead actually to increased innovation and competition. We've seen telehealth and teleconsultation raising with virtual waiting rooms versus waiting in a physical office waiting room. Symptom triage as well, right? Avoiding the trip to the urgent care and primary care and be treating at home. So basically, obviously, yes, COVID-19 has changed the way patients are interacting with healthcare and accessing it.
How yourself, Stefan? So you had one of those symptom trackers too. I remember with the previous.
Yeah, I think COVID, the COVID pandemic was actually full of use cases that are relatively high volume and standardized, right? If you're triaging patients that have a cough or a fever and you're trying to figure out if they're at risk for COVID and what you need to do, what they should be doing next, or whether they need to get tested, that is a primary use case for a simple chatbot or conversational interface that implements a decision tree in a way that is very efficient and keeps patients off the phone and gives people quick answers. Then follow up after testing, getting people checked in before they get to a facility where they have to be showing up in person. There was all these vaccine eligibility just recently. There's all these like use cases around COVID-19 that I think were prime use cases for a relatively simple deployment of conversational AI. And what I think it has done is it gets people familiar with using these types of interfaces, not just for these use cases, but for other use cases as well. I think we've seen a significant push in adoption of this type of technology for simple things, but also now more complicated use cases that previously would have probably not been top of the list for implementing a digital assistant for.
Fair enough. And how about you, Josh?
I would just echo what's been said. Many of the use cases that emerged, right, were about getting people information, right? Getting them information about where they could get their vaccine, how should they interpret the cough that they're having, those sorts of things. And these are tailor-made for these types of experiences. I think though, I also agree that the big takeaway is the changes in user behavior, right? And this goes back to meeting people where they're at. I think that where they're at now, that target has moved, and it's moved in ways that make it way easier to serve them, right? We're used to experiencing things digitally, virtually, in ways that we weren't before. Zooming has become a verb that almost everybody understands that they did not used to, right? So those types of changes also, I think, increase the appetite for consumption of information and experiences that chatbot, conversational AI, et cetera, can provide.
Yeah, that's fair. Definitely that meeting folks where they're at and the channels that they're on. We talked a little bit about the triage and symptom checking. onboarding. Are there any other use cases that stand out perhaps for healthcare in addition to those that might come to mind? And perhaps, yeah, Stefan.
Yeah, so I think there are use cases for this type of technology all along the entire patient journey that starts with discovery, where I'm trying to find out where I need to go or what I might have to do about a particular symptom or concern I have. Finding access to care. So that goes into triage and navigation and getting people into the right appointments at the right time. But then continues, right? Why, if you go through this process already on a digital assistant, why would you want to jump over to then filling some paper forms when you actually get to the primary care office or for your radiology visit? You can take care of these types of information intakes and then pushing that into the electronic medical record as part of the same journey. And then that journey can continue after the visit too, like when you follow up with patients after they've been seen, or you check in with them after a couple of days to see if their problem has resolved. Those are all prime use cases for deploying the same sort of digital assistant technology. So our focus is to cover the entire patient journey from start to finish, but the majority of the focus right now is on the front end of the journey, how to make it easier to access information, get quick answers, and get access to the right kind of care. I think those are that's the primary goal right now.
Definitely. Any additional ones for either Josh or Alexia? Any?
Yeah, so I think all of those are absolutely areas that I think have a ton of opportunity. There's also all the back office stuff, right? All of the serving providers, right? So whether it's helping generate clinical notes, fill in the EMR from the provider's perspective, the amount of phone calls that providers' offices actually have to engage in to make sure that they're getting paid, whether it's confirming their address, those types of things that they have, the interactions they have with the payer. There's a lot of opportunity to take time, energy, and effort out of those and make providers better able to get paid and better able to just understand what's covered for the members. So all of those, whether it's smarter IVRs, chatbots, whatever, I think there's a ton of opportunity to help the providers as well.
Yeah, I was about to say it's patient journey and HCP journey. We can see that from awareness to education, access and affordability, onboarding, and then the adherence, right, of the patient. But ultimately, where the conversational AI can play a big role is the personalization of the experience from start to the end, and making sure that actually the system is capable to learn the patient's journey down the road. So it's not only providing solutions at specific time of that journey, but basically learning from the interaction with the patient down the road and better trigger and better serve the patients based on that analysis and learnings.
Yeah, it actually touches upon an interesting point. There's a bunch of different avenues to go with this. I'm curious about the different channels that you all are seeing, but just on that personalization note, and especially because it's healthcare related, you start to get into like the privacy and user information, the data compliance. I'm curious how that plays into this. How do you handle, being able to help the user through that whole journey, but also keep in mind some of the perhaps privacy issues? Perhaps I can start with you. Yeah.
Yeah. At Orbita, this is our, since the very beginning, that was our main focus. We are an HIPAA compliant software. We're SOC 2. Pretty soon ISO and ITRUST. So those are key value at Orbita that we are embracing along every single feature and capabilities that we can develop. Obviously, the different data that we would collect from the patient are completely, they're going through the process of those security and privacy principles and so what I would say about that is basically any type of solutions and customer solution that we would build are following those processes and making sure that we are relying on those very healthcare specific regulations.
Yeah, definitely. How about Josh or Stefan, any additional thing perhaps to add on the data compliance?
Sure. So I think obviously things like high trust and HIPAA compliance are of huge importance when it comes to your infrastructure and how you're building. But I do think the channel and the experiences matter too, right? So the way you would build something for a smart speaker is potentially very different than the way you would do it for a chatbot that you have on your phone or even within an IVR. You know, Josh, your hemorrhoid cream is ready. It's very different when announced over the Alexa than it is when it's, you know, sent to me via SMS. And so I think those experiences also should kind of dictate how we think about just the information we want to put in our chatbots.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, hopefully that just happens at home. It's just immediate family members. How about yourself,
actually,
oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Stefan. I would actually jump on that and echo what you just said, Josh, because I'm thinking about that Amazon skill, right? Where basically you do have to ask if it's an HCP or a physician or a patient at the very beginning of the launch when you launch the skill, because then from that answer, you can trigger a specific experience. So those kind of very, very small, right, detail are very important in the field of healthcare.
And I imagine using some sort of account linking to know that it's actually, that person.
Yeah, I think, you know, some of the things that have been said, I think, are now like becoming table stakes. HIPAA compliance, SOC 2 are things you have to just check the box on. Otherwise, I think you will find it difficult to compete in this space. From a user perspective, I would also assume that regardless, whatever medium I interact with, whether it's SMS or a chatbot on a website, that whatever I share is protected and kept private. And if you're accepting free text input in any form, you can never rule out that somebody shares, I don't know, my aunt Betty had a particular thing or went to Dr. Thompson, and then all of a sudden you have PHI as part of an utterance that you accepted from a user. So I think you need to treat every free text input that you get per default as potentially containing PHI. But it does pose some additional challenges on the internally as you're building models that scale across multiple patients to be able to separate, like, kind of abstract features and individual observations out of the specifics of a patient context. So you can improve natural language processing, mapping to symptoms, and digital experiences. So there's some nuances there that I don't know if we want to go into those technical details, but there are additional challenges that you need to overcome to make sure that you kind of separate the utterance layer from the response layer and build a model that applies to more than just one particular customer.
Well, just on that note, for getting started, how do healthcare, whether it's the medical facilities itself, maybe even perhaps the insurance, how do they get started in deciding the use cases and perhaps building those NLP models? Are there any good tips you might have?
I would suggest actually to start with a very simple, not clinical use case without any integration, education and access, right? Digital front door. This is one of the first use case we are seeing. Yeah, that would be my advice.
The start simple and expand kind of thing.
Yeah.
How about yourself, Stefan? Do you see the same thing, or?
Yeah, I think the land and expand definitely works. You want to get especially stakeholders at our customers, which are typically organizations that are conservative and risk averse for good reason, because we're dealing with patients' lives. So you want to make sure you get them comfortable with a new modality or like a new way of interfacing with their system through a digital assistant. But we've seen pretty quick, let's say, graduation. You start with a simple use case, and then when people are comfortable that works and patients are adopting it, you then move to more complex use cases. And what we found is that it's actually, once you've kind of identified what the standard set is that applies to, let's say, a health system or a provider organization, it's pretty much very similar types of requests that you're handling. So we've kind of developed, let's say, a standard package. She mentioned digital front door. I think that's a key one that is popular that you want to start with. And then from there, it depends on the organizational kind of priorities, whether they're focused and on new patient acquisition, or whether it's about making the patient experience better to get people access to the right care. And that will determine kind of the next steps in a deployment and where you add complexity and depth of the experience. And maybe one other thing to say is, like, there's a big difference between the unauthenticated use cases. So where you don't know where the patient is, you just put something on the website that is maybe educational or gives standard answers to non-clinical questions. And authenticated use cases where I know it's Artie or Stefan, right, or Josh, and I can pull your history from the EMR, and I know that you had a physician visit with your primary care doctor 2 weeks ago, and that you complained about cough, right? And then I can personalize the experience, right? So those two are different domains. The second one is significantly more complex and is typically a step 2 or step 3 in a deployment journey with a customer.
Yeah, definitely. And how about you, Josh? How are folks getting started at UnitedHealth?
So I think it echoes many of the same themes, right? Like, start in those unauthenticated, simple spaces. Now that's kind of in the rearview mirror for us, right? So I guess a few things that jump out when you have as many digital properties as we do. When you start with those simple use cases, it's actually really easy to fracture your chatbot environment, right? We have our RX business, our care business, our UnitedHealthcare, all of these various, and so you start coming up with questions around, like, how do you want to scope your experiences, right? Versus, should we have one United Health Group chatbot? Well, that doesn't make sense. So as we think about these skills, we have to think about, like, how many chatbots is the right amount? Is it the same thing that's in our phone system as on our website, as in our mobile app? And just when you have this many digital properties, it's slightly different. How to strategize around how to get started. I think for us, it's in general, it should be a Venn diagram, right? Of viability. Can you do it? There are still some things that are quite hard. Is there an appetite for it for the person who would be a consumer of it? And is there value in doing it? So there are some things which are totally doable and people would want, but if you only have 10 people who are ever going to show up and use it, is that worth the investment? And so I think it's, if you can hit the mark on all 3 of those, then it's probably a really good spot to start.
Fair enough. And then how about, since you have a bit of the data science background, how do you go about, building, say, the models or coming up with training phrases? Are you looking at past historical data? Is there,
Sure.
What are some of the tips there?
I can tell you it's a very different experience at UnitedHealthcare than it was for me at Ramble, the startup, right? Because there was no training corpus, right? We have hundreds of millions of interactions, right, with our members, our providers, whomever. And so there's a huge corpus of data with which to work to really understand how people are asking us questions, whether now they don't always map one-to-one, what you're going to type into an email form, or maybe the conversation you're having with one of our advocates on the phone. They're slightly different, but they're a starting point. Not only are they a good example of the language used across the different demographics that we might serve, our Medicare population might speak differently than, an employer population somewhere. But they also give us really good insight into the types of questions people ask. And that's where you have to start when you're designing a dialogue system.
Yeah, fair enough. How about yourself, either Alexia or Stefan? Any tips for folks how to get started with the models?
Okay. So I think in the beginning, you kind of face this chicken and egg problem, right? So you just have to bootstrap. And that may start as simple as just, okay, everyone get together and think of 10 ways of how they would ask that question. Right? Yeah. That's the very startup-y type of way to get going. Yeah. And then as you get user data, it gets a lot easier because then you have real world utterances to work on. But you also don't want to launch an experience that is totally terrible in the beginning for the first initial users, because that it might also kill the project. We've now trained our NLP, I think, on about 17 million or so utterances collected across our deployments. So it gets easier, but the long tail is really, really long. So it's probably a never-ending journey. You just want to always work on what is the next piece that will unlock another set of utterances that we can respond better to or more accurately to. And in some cases, it also depends on what's available in the backend systems. You may understand the question that the patient asked, but you may not have a way of retrieving that information from a system automatically to provide an answer. So in the meantime, you may have to say, sorry, go here or call this person in order to get an answer to your question, even if we perfectly understand what the ask is, right? So it's just constantly evolving and working on that ABC curve where you start with the most frequent things most frequent high value things first, and then you work down the curve.
Definitely. Alexia, you about to say something too, or?
Sure. Ultimately, the user testing and the way our system could learn means a lot in terms of improving experiences. I would say, though, that it's not only the conversational AI, right? Because we are deploying the experiences through multiple channels. And when you do have screens, chatbot, mobile apps, you do have to take into consideration the design of the interface and the way the patient would interact with those screens. So it's conversational design, but it's also user experience, user interfaces that have to be taken into consideration. So when we're doing our user testing, with a very user-centered approach, we are taking into consideration the holistic experience.
Yeah, and definitely in this space, I imagine there's terms that aren't normal, maybe are more medical related, that aren't what folks normally would use in everyday conversation. I remember there was some folks that were building an Alexa skill to remind people to take medication, but they had to come up with their own phonetic dictionary. That I think the example was that someone said that if they said "let the door," that meant "lift the door," that kind of thing. And you all have been talking about channels quite a bit. Are there certain channels you see folks building for? Is it IVR, chat, SMS? Are there ones that are better suited for these types of use cases? Maybe Alexia, right here. Are there any channels? Yeah.
Oh yeah. So we do see all the channels requests, but it all depends on the use cases, right? So if you are into actually an authenticated experience or non-authenticated experience, you would provide different channels. Basically, notifications, reminders would use and leverage IVRs and SMS, whereas a voice skill would be better in terms of escalating to a live chat agent. On the other side, you would have chatbot for collection of data, right? It's easier for a patient to type in than just to describe orally first name, last name, date of birth, and all the different information that we would collect. So I would say that the channels depend on the use case, and that's also the expertise of our companies, right? To provide those advice, really identify the customer needs, the customer's problems to better suit the solution.
Yeah, how about either Josh or Stefan, anything that you're seeing with the different types of channels, which may be more common, or does it depend on the use case?
So I think long-term, any successful strategy is an omni-channel strategy. We said earlier that the expectations of consumers has changed dramatically over the last year. So if you'd made a strategy, 2 years ago, you don't account for COVID and the way that changes people's ability, desire to consume technology in different ways. I think you're screwed. So I think if you're not building towards omni-channel, eventually you're making a mistake. That said, you can absolutely prioritize different channels from a timing perspective, right? By sheer volume, for us, calls are absolutely where we have our most interactions with our members. So anything we can do to improve those makes everybody happier. So that's a big target for us.
Yeah, not much to add. Omnichannel, I think, is the way to go. I think it's generally easier to build for typed experiences. So whether that is a web chat or whether that's text messages or transition from text to web chat. So that's probably the starting point. But as Josh said, I think, unfortunately, the reality in healthcare still is that voice and inbound call volume or outbound calls is the majority of this. To give an example from one of our customers, they receive about 3 million phone calls a year. And I think we did about 300,000 transactions on the website, or patient interactions on the website, right? So it's like 10% of the total call volume. And if you want to make a big impact on like from a commercial point of view, you need to get inserted into those calls to start diverting some of those that you can handle automatically away from the phone. So I think it needs to be the case, but I think it's easier to prove out that certain things work and that patients accept them and what the kind of the right user experience is on chat first, and then transition some of that to voice, because voice introduces a couple of other additional complexities that you need to figure out and beyond just the user experience and the integration, right?
Fair enough. Just on that note, like trying to divert calls, or maybe it's even the case of like escalations and containments. How are these enterprises generating awareness that a chatbot exists, or the IVR or Alexa skill might exist? Are there things that work well? And
we've seen the biggest success actually with customers that would proactively announce kind of the existence of this to their communities, right? Or make it a digital care team member that they promote actively. Ideally, they name them, they become part of their digital brand expression as more and more service shifts into an on-demand or digital first kind of way. You need a way to brand yourself on that new playing field. And we've seen the biggest success with customers that have just made that part of their communication strategy. Here's, I don't know, Claire, for example, or Mia, who's part of our care team, a digital member of our care team who now cares for you. And that's been the most successful in getting people to adopt and build trust and shift more and more use cases into that digital care team member that maybe started with a small level of understanding for certain things in the beginning, but then, over time gains more capabilities and more use cases that you can add.
Fair enough. How about you, Josh? How are you guys generating awareness? Yeah.
I think it's very much that, right? Now, when I think about the types of interactions, though, that people want to have with us, they typically want information. They want information about their claims, about which doctor they should see, about a lab result, whatever it is. They're often finding that phone number via which to call us from a digital property. And that's the opportunity, right? The opportunity is when they were looking for the answer to that question. Typically that phone call is a failure condition. They didn't get what they needed, so they're going to call us. And that's the opportunity to give them the answer, because that's what they want. The goal is not, hey, I want to get on the phone. The goal is answer my question. So that's the opportunity.
I was about to say, the reality is that it's a new tool. It's a new marketing tool for some companies. I'm thinking about pharmaceutical brands, right? It's basically how to leverage the current and existing marketing approach, marketing, I would say, initiatives, and add on that the virtual assistant that can leverage the overall experiences that they're already built on content and everything. So it's basically really working in collaboration with the digital teams and the marketing teams when it comes to pharmaceutical and life sciences companies, and build with them the messaging around those chatbots. Also, I would say once the chatbot is online, let's just leverage it as well to educate the user on how to use it and help them get engaged with the tool. The tool has to be intuitive. Again, as I said, UI, UX, very important to raise the adoption of those technologies.
Yeah, that's fair. And just one of the things that was mentioned just a minute ago too is the sort of the personality. So there's personalizing for the users, but then the personality of this chatbot or voice assistant. And I'm curious, how do folks go about that? Or are there any tips or recommendations that how to create that personality inside the experience?
Yeah, so this is something very important for us at Orbita. It's actually, again, our mission, automation with empathy. And so we're working hard on really bringing the empathy in our virtual assistant. The way you would actually create the experience based on the user personas means a lot. This is how you are becoming a very empathetic with the patient within the interaction. We're working hard on user mapping, right? Empathetic mapping. There are some best practices that we are putting in place to make sure that the virtual assistant will follow that mission.
And how about you, Josh? Are you adding any personality too?
So I don't have as much experience here maybe as some of the others, but I do think that it is very relevant where you're deploying them. So I would compare, for example, the need for personality in a scheduling scenario versus something that's helping you with your care plan, right? So there's very, very different types of ways we could deploy these. And I think that you'd want to take into consideration the types of scenarios and really the expectations of a user when they're interacting with the experience that you've created.
Fair enough. Anything additional, Stefan?
Maybe on top of that, I think it's a lot about setting the right expectations at the front end of the experience, or when you talk to members, patients, users about what they can expect from this digital assistant, right? If you go in with like, this is going to be a human-like experience that can answer any questions, just like I pick up the phone, you're likely going to generate like disappointment when people are actually using it. But you also don't want to, focus it too narrowly, because then you miss out on opportunities for learning on additional use cases that you might provide, and showcasing some of the additional capabilities that you have. So I think it's shaping the expectations narrowly and then exceeding them or over delivering against them is kind of the way to build trust with users. And another aspect I think here is most people, I think, understand that they're not talking to a human, and you have and they're just interested in getting a quick answer, but there's an opportunity for like that extra bit of delight, right? Just by making the experience a little bit more nice than you would expect, like a little bit nicer than that IVR, press 1 for this, press 2 for that, I think can go a long way in really, getting patients to have an unexpectedly delightful experience when they're interfacing with technology like this, that again feeds into coming back and using it again the next time around.
Yeah, and then keeping it broad like that, inevitably you're going to get questions or messages that that is not set up to handle. Are there any tips you have for handling those fallbacks? Start with you, Stefan.
Sure. I mean, the first step is to acknowledge that you didn't understand. maybe you just didn't catch it, and you give them a chance to rephrase their question. And then when you don't understand, is offering the next step, and that in many ways that's escalating to either a live chat with a human if that time is available, or you just provide, do you want me to connect you with a human member, or speak to someone on the phone, and then you present an option for somebody to call. Right? You never want to leave them hanging with like no recourse or no answer to their question.
Fair enough. How about Josh or Alexia, any tips for handling fallbacks?
I think the biggest tip I can give is plan for that first, like plan for the unhappy path. That's the biggest spot I see projects fail when they go between proof of concept and getting into production. Is in the proof of concept, like the happy path works super well across all different, voice variations, if it's voice, different types of utterances. But that unhappy path is where it really just falls apart. And just understanding what is your escalation. Everybody hates the IVR, but I don't think anybody hates the IVR as much as when they get caught in that loop where there's no way to escalate.
Right.
Where your only option is to start saying swear words, because a lot of them have that built in as like, all right, now send this to a person. And so just we have to not recreate that environment in our chatbot experiences.
How about Alexia, any additional tips? Or
I mean, I do agree with the escalation piece and the fact that we need to cover the wrong path, not the silver path, I would say, not only the golden path. But obviously, again, there are some best practices that we implement in every single solution. So it's almost our checklist, right? Exactly the same type of checklist we would have in other industry. We do implement checklists that enables to make sure that we cover any fallback, any exit flow, any when you're checking the patient's very identity, age, right? Are you really allowed to talk to that patient at that certain age? So there are some gatekeeper that we really need to keep in mind, and based on that, we're implementing related conversational experiences.
Fair enough. And then once these things are launched, what are like are there any key like KPIs or how are the enterprises measuring success? Like what does success look like?
I can give a few of them. Obviously, there are many. We do identify quantitative KPIs and qualitative KPIs. Some of them from the quantitative approach, it's basically evaluating the effectiveness of the chatbot. So it could come from the activity volume, the bounce rate, the user rate by open sessions, the interaction rate, so many that I could list. And from the qualitative KPIs, Then you are into that self-service rate, user feedback, comprehension level. There are others as well. So those are very key KPIs that we are implementing in pre-built dashboards, right? And that can help our customers analyze the experience and improve it down the road.
How about Stefan or Josh, any KPIs or ways that companies are measuring success?
I think Alexia mentioned the most important ones. Maybe one other thing to add is, and that one is not straightforward to measure, is what is a successful interaction for the patient, right? Did they, based on what they initially set out to do when they answer a question, how can we help you? Did we get them to the point where they wanted to go at the end? And that may be a simple interaction where I have a question, here's the answer, we're done, right? Then it's just a 2-turn interaction, or it may be a 25-question triage and care navigation flow that has a lot of different steps and where we need to get someone to actually book an appointment at the end, right? So, but ultimately it's about, did we live up to the patient's expectations in getting them help with their problem or their inquiry?
And the only thing I would add is that part of how we can sometimes think about measuring that is we talk about omnichannel out, but also omnichannel in. And for certain types of interactions, we should not expect them to then call us 5 minutes later or send us an email or these types of things. And typically, if we do see that for many interactions, we should consider that a failure condition for a chatbot interaction. And so depending on what the expected end state is of our interaction with our chatbot, we can look at those other channels to see if we really serve their need.
Fair enough. Sorry, one more question. And if folks have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we can go through them. But before we get to that, one final question for all the panelists is, where do you see the future of conversational interfaces and conversational AI going, and any things that need to change or happen, or what do you see? And perhaps Josh, since we're chatting.
Sure. So I think the future, we're just going to use these more and more. I think they're going to become more and more effective. I think as people become more used to, like, we're going to see this convergence, right? Like right now, when I talk to my Alexa, I have my Alexa voice. I have my Alexa lexicon. I speak a way that I know Alexa's gonna, so I've been trained, right? We always talk about training the chatbot. We've also trained people. And I think what we're gonna see is this convergence of the chatbot gets better and people become more natural. And we converge at a much more natural point where those dialogues, those interactions feel much more, I would say, human. I don't think we're gonna think we're talking to humans, but we will get to act like humans. And I think that that's going to be a tipping point from a usability perspective and from a user adoption perspective.
How about Alexia?
I believe in the 5G, and I think that's going to be a pretty big breakthrough in terms of how the patient would interact with the device, or should I say the device would interact with the patient, right? I believe that the device will talk to you, will get into a place where the 5G connectivity will really be a game changer, where you'll get into a place where the accuracy, right? The accuracy of the experiences, the utterances, and the extraction that we would get will be very, it won't be an obstacle anymore. Also, obviously, you know, when with the machine learning and the deep learning that we will all be able to implement in our system, it's growing pretty fast. And so we'll get into a place where those accuracy in detecting different utterances in the experience will really help the patients. And I would say, obviously, we'll get some context-based experiences, recommendation engine. So a lot of opening thanks to that 5G connectivity.
Fair enough. How about Stefan?
Yeah, I think that question is almost like, so where do you think is the future of apps, right? It's just, well, or the web, right? It's just something that you've accepted and it's now part of everyday life, whether it's ordering a pizza or going to your doctor or trying to pay a bill for your insurance or settling a claim. I think just the same way conversational assistants or digital assistants are just going to be part of interfaces that we interact with, and we're not going to even notice they're there if they're well done. And it's just the most efficient path for us to get something done. And at some point, these interfaces will transition to voice. And I think in some industries, we're already almost there, where you can have a phone call with a robot and still get things done and not be frustrated and hammering 9 to talk to a human operator. Right? And I think healthcare is probably maybe a couple of years behind on that journey compared to maybe airlines or banking, but I think we're getting there pretty quickly. And so I think that's going to make life better for everyone, including patients, members, and healthcare staff.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, it's great insights. Well, I appreciate everyone being part of this. It was definitely, I learned a lot, and it was, appreciate everyone's insights in this. Thanks again, Josh, Alexia, and Stefan for being part of the panel.
Of course.
Thanks for having us, Artie.
Inviting us.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.